I'll show you the town. I love it. Bet your bottom dollar you lose the blues in Chicago. Chicago, the town that Billy Sunday couldn't shut down. On State Street, that great street, I just want to say they do things that they don't do on Broadway. Say, you'll have the time of your life. I saw a man, he danced with his wife in Chicago, Chicago, my hometown.
Good evening, I'm William Pace. Thanks so much for tuning in to our show tonight. My guest this evening is Gary Leitzell, the former mayor of Dayton. Good to see you, Mayor.
It's great to see you again, William.
So tell me what you've been up to these days.
Well, I've kind of become a property manager. I own a couple of houses in Dayton in my neighborhood, and one I've turned into an Airbnb house where
bed and breakfast.
Well, we don't provide the breakfast. We provide lodgings for people who are coming in for a weekend or a week or a month sometimes. We're close to UD, so we get a lot of parents of students coming to visit their kids, and it's been a great experience. So I'm going to be doing that with another house I own in the same neighborhood. I'm working on it, painting it, fixing it. Have to completely redo it. So that's what I've been busy doing for a while.
So you've been keeping busy then,
No.
Not being idle.
No.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk tonight about on the show is how can we encourage and foster new businesses in this area because of the economy, and I remember so many of the main thoroughfares having businesses on them, like hat shops, restaurants, auto mechanic shops, you name it, novelty shops. There was Dayton had all these businesses, and so how can we bring that back to this area? How can we encourage people to come up with an idea, something that is a need in the community, and encourage people to start from scratch and build a business?
Well, I think education is the key. The big box retailers have kind of killed all the small businesses, and I think we're starting to see more and more people doing things like we have Brim, which is a hat shop down in the Oregon district that specializes. 150 years ago, the majority of people were farmers, but you weren't just a farmer. You were a carpenter, you were a veterinarian, you were a stonemason, you were a plasterer, right? So when you left the farm, if you chose to leave the farm because your older siblings were going to take care of it, you could go into town and you were multi-talented. And I think one of the mistakes we make now in our education system is we teach people to be specialists, and we don't give them a general knowledge of stuff. And so when we get out of school or we go on to college, we specialize in a field, and sometimes that field isn't available.
Yes, or in difficult economic times, as many people have found, that it may not be as in demand as other professions are.
I experienced that personally myself. I grew up in England, and I have a degree in geology, and I graduated from the University of London in 1982, and we had gone through the oil crisis in 1973 and again in '79. And so what happened was all the geologists were out there looking for oil, and by the time I got out of college in 1982, they had found enough to carry us for the next 30 years. So I couldn't find a job in the oil industry unless I stayed on at school and became a PhD student or whatever. So I ended up in retail. My first job was with Gimbel's department store. Now, there's a name that people don't hear anymore because they're now out of business. But yeah, I worked for Gimbel's department store, and so it threw me into a whole different, line in my life, and I've never used my geology degree.
And many people don't use what they go to school for, what they educate for and train for and study for. They don't use that. They end up in another profession.
Right. But if they had some skills that they were taught at school, just basic things, even hands-on stuff or electronics or something that they had an interest in, then they at least have something that they have an interest in that they could fall back on with a little bit of knowledge. I had a geology degree, and my specialty was going to be geology, so getting into anything else wasn't where my head was at. And so you basically have to retrain yourself. And then, you know, and then I jumped from job to job. You know, back in the late 80s, we had merger mania. All the corporations were merging with each other and consolidating. So Gimbel's got bought up by Kaufman's, and so I was out of work. And then the job in between, I was the store manager of Lane Bryant in downtown Pittsburgh. And I didn't like Lane Bryant. I didn't like the way they were managed. So I got out of that, and then I worked in the insurance industry for an outfit called Century 21 Insurance Services, which was owned by MetLife. Loved Century 21 Insurance Services, but when they merged with MetLife, I didn't like the traditional way that the MetLife agents were doing business. So I got out of that, and then I ended up working for an auction company, which was the big eye-opener for me. I began to realize that stuff has value. And you know, you think, oh, a used car is worth $3,000, say, but a little tin toy of Popeye on a tricycle is worth $4,000. You know, so.
And didn't you start a little business that you started from your basement, your lower level?
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about that. And
so when I got every job I loved, I got let go from because of upper management decisions, not my ability, upper management decisions. So I finally got tired of it. When I got let go from the auction company, I said, you know, I'm going to figure out what I do good and if I can make money at it. So I used to paint toy soldiers, miniatures.
Oh, okay.
It's a hobby. I used to paint these things for myself, and so I grabbed 20 of these things that I didn't want to paint. I really wasn't interested in them, and I timed myself. And I figured I could make $15 an hour painting toy soldiers for people, just working out of my house. I didn't have anyone breathing down my neck. I didn't have to be told when to get up and when to go to sleep or anything like that. And I went to gaming conventions all over the country with these things and got business. You know, people would send me stuff, or they'd give me stuff at conventions to paint, and I'd invoice them and ship the stuff out.
Okay.
And so I did that for years.
So you started that right out of your basement then?
Right. So I mean, that basically carried me for many years. I became a bit of a hermit. I didn't get out of the house much. I stayed up and did it late at night because the phone wasn't ringing and there were no distractions. There was nothing good on television, you know, and I just sat there and painted.
I don't know if you remember the Mad Hatter costume shop.
Yes, you took me there.
Yeah, and that started in Betty Lemke's basement. And she started designing costumes and so on and so forth, and eventually she was able to open up a shop there on Brown Street for many years near the Old Hickory. And it was one of the best costume shops in this area, and it garnered her a good return in terms of you know, income and a living. But we need to take a little break right now, but when we return, we'll be talking more about the business that you started in your basement, and maybe you can tell us how you financed that and how you were able to put that together.
Okay.
More with Gary Leitzell when we return. Stay with us. Hi, I'm William Pace. Thanks so much for tuning us in tonight. We're back with Gary Leitzell, former mayor of Dayton. And before we went to break last time, we were talking about the business that you started right from your own basement, designing. Tell us a bit more about what you designed and what was involved in creating the product.
Well, it was a hobby of mine. It started when I was at school. I used to buy these little lead soldiers and paint them, and people set them up on tables and they play tabletop battles with them using dice and rulers and stuff. It's called wargaming. So what I did, I think it was around 1992, I was going to gaming conventions in Pennsylvania, and I wrote a book called Brushstrokes, and it was a very thin paperback. I used to sell for like $12, telling people how to paint figures. So I would do these painting seminars, and everybody wanted to buy my figures, but I wasn't selling them because they were my figures. And I was at a big gaming convention called Gen Con. At that time, it was up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was helping a friend who manufactured lead soldiers. So he produced them and would sell them unpainted at his table. And I think I volunteered to do a painting seminar, and I had a bunch of my figures on display, and some guy came up and said, "How much do you want for those?" I said, "Oh, they're not for sale, they're mine." He says, "I'll give you $150 for that one and that one." I went, "Okay." And then
$150
for these little figures, right? And then he says, "Okay, now we got that over with. how much do you want for all of these? And so I walked away from that convention with $3,000 in my pocket.
Wow.
Which is what.
That's a good day's pay.
It was, and what I realized was, when I was in the insurance business, your average commission was about $350 for a life insurance policy, and you would come back to that customer maybe every 7 years. With the hobby industry, my average commission was about $500 every 6 months, because people will spend money on their hobby. And so I always labeled myself as I'm the candy man. You know, I'm here's eye candy, you like it, you buy it, and then they give me more. So it was an interesting eye opener for me, and that's when I said, when I worked for the auction business, I learned that stuff has value, and how do you supply that stuff. And it was a niche. It's a niche market. I mean, it's not a huge market. I painted military soldiers. I did stuff. People who played Dungeons and Dragons wanted their stuff painted. A couple of my customers. One was Major Barrett Roddenberry, Gene Roddenberry's wife from the Star Trek series, and I also did some stuff for George R.R. Martin, who is behind the Game of Thrones series. So when people would mock me before I became mayor about painting toy soldiers, I would say you don't fully comprehend what I do. It's a miniatures industry. I do museum quality stuff. It's not, slap paint here and there. And here were some of my customers. It was a change in their attitude towards what I did. So
just starting from your own basement and doing
hobby.
this here as a hobby,
right.
It flourished into a business.
Right. But there's a problem with that. When a hobby becomes a business, it's no longer a hobby.
Well,
because I had no more of my stuff. I was painting for everybody else. So what do I have? Nothing. I sold it all.
But you have a business now,
right?
And then you can prosper from that.
Right.
So how do we identify people as entrepreneurs? How do we find people? How do we encourage people to come forth? There's a need for that. There's an entrepreneurial spirit
some people get it early, some don't. I mean, I didn't have that entrepreneurial spirit until I got laid off a couple of times. And then
that will do it for you.
Right, and then
when
it's
you're
like
out of work, then you have to find something to make a living.
Right, what can I do that I'm good at, that I'll enjoy doing, and can I make some money at it? And that's what it is.
Well, that is the old adage. They say, find something you're really, really passionate about and try to figure out some way how you can make some money at it, you know? And that's why we need more people to come forth. If the Pattersons hadn't come forth, if the Ketterings hadn't come forth, it takes somebody with an idea and an insight and intuition how to come up with an idea and to parlay it into something bigger and something that people will want, to buy, and then, but one of the big problems with people coming up with starting businesses is the upfront cost. You've got to have rent, you've got to have the money for the products, you've got to have, you've got to market the products. There's a lot of initial cost in getting started in a business. And so what source of funding is available to people to create a business, to go out on business?
Well, to start up, it's very hard. I remember when I was doing this early on, I couldn't get loans from the bank. You're unreliable. You don't have anything. Though we did have a house that had a mortgage on it. But so the best advice probably would be, turn a hobby into a business, or turn something you enjoy into a business while you're working a full-time job.
Yeah, and segue into it.
Right, and build it on weekends, build it up. You could have a food truck. If you wanted to be a chef, instead of having a big restaurant, you could have a food truck. You could get that going out on weekends while you're working somewhere else during the week, and build up a clientele. And who knows, you might find that if you went full-time in that, it would replace your regular job. You don't just want to dive in if you're small-time, and unless you have somebody funding you lots of money, you don't just want to dive in and try to start something and have all the best equipment and everything, because if you have all this debt on your shoulders and you can't make enough money to pay it off, it's all going to get repossessed, and you're going to be out of business, and you're
and many businesses don't succeed, don't last.
Many don't.
Past, and I think one of the key is to be able to maybe be like you said earlier, have like a day job or another source of income. And then I know many people who have started businesses on the side, like in the evening when they, or like you started in the basement. And there are many people that have businesses like hair salons, auto repair shops, where they come in the evening after they get off of their day job, and they work in the evening, but they have someone there during the daytime that's running the business, and then they come in the evening and relieve the day person. So they're really like working from their day job and their night job about maybe 12 hours a day. But that's a way to segue into it, and then you get the business going and working, and meeting its operational cost and creating, then when you get into the profit part of it, then maybe you could consider leaving your day job and so forth.
Right.
And that is one way to do it. But I know a lot of businesses, particularly the restaurant business, they rely upon the need of people to eat. And we're going to be talking more about that when we return with Gary Leitzell. Stay with us. Hi, I'm William Pace, and my guest this evening is Gary Leitzell, former mayor of Dayton. And before we went to break, we were talking about the food industry, restaurants, and I think it's important for an entrepreneur to find something that people really gotta have. They gotta have food. Another business would be like auto repair. People are looking for reasonable, affordable auto repairs on their cars to get back and forth. That's another needed profession. Something that people really need and that will stand the test against difficult economic times. Because what I've found is that when times get really difficult, like the ones we're in now, that people are really watching their money very carefully. But I think the restaurant industry has somehow managed to stay afloat in difficult times because people do have to eat. And so I think the automobile repair business is another one that people, they have to have their cars serviced, they have to get back and forth to work, and identifying those avenues where people could see a niche in there, or some way that they could get in to the market with something that people need. You know.
Well, I mean, there's other things too. You have cottage industries where people can make certain things at home, breads, and things like that, certain cakes, certain jams and jellies and things. When I was mayor, one of the things I used to tell people, and we still have a need for it because no one's done it, we need a community kitchen. What's a community kitchen? A community kitchen is a fully functional, commercial-grade kitchen that can be leased out for $20 an hour or whatever to someone who wants to come in and make 50 gallons of sauerkraut that they can then bottle and sell to a restaurant or a supermarket, right? Because the cost, most people don't start up a cooking thing because the kitchen, the cost of all the stainless steel appliances and the hoods and everything that they require by county food standards is going to cost $60,000. But if somebody, and a woman named Tanya Fish, when I spoke to her about the need of a community kitchen, was going to try to do it. She called it Synergy Incubator, the Synergy Incubator. But politics got in the way, and she lost hope in the end, and it's a shame. So I mean, I don't mind saying we do need a community kitchen. If you look at some of the churches, they have fully functional, professional, commercial-grade kitchens that get used 5 times a year. And if the churches would say, hey, I could lease this out to some members of my congregation to make things that they're good at, the best barbecue sauce out there, and if they can bottle it and take it to the market and sell it, now they've started a food industry business that isn't a restaurant, that doesn't require having employees and things like that. But the thing is, we need someone with the ability to set up a commercial kitchen that says, hey, I've got this ability to do this, I can manage it, and if anyone wants to come and rent my equipment, you know, and factor that into the cost of whatever it is you're selling, then there's a business. And there's lots of things like that.
Yeah, it's identifying what people need and supply and demand.
Right.
And
people pay for entertainment too. Entertainment and food are two things people will pay for.
They want to, well, that's evident because, you know, in the Great Depression, Hollywood flourished hand over fist, you know.
People wanted to see
people
movies,
were trying to escape the hard times. So every time they had a nickel or a dime or whatever, they went to the movies. So that's another avenue for people to get into and try to figure out how they can make a living. What would you say are the top 3 skills needed to be a successful entrepreneur?
Well, I guess discipline. You have to be self-disciplined.
You really do,
right.
because you are responsible for making your living.
Right.
And if you don't get up and work it,
well, they say, you know, you're supposed to sleep 8 hours, work 8 hours, play 8 hours, just don't do it all in the same 8 hours, right? So yeah, I mean, you have to be disciplined. If you're going to do something, it's like when I painted the miniatures, I had to get up every day and put 8 hours into it at least, and be consistent with that. Another thing, I guess, determined. You have to be determined.
Relentless.
Right. Well, you're relentless. I'm determined.
Relentless.
Right.
Determined and relentless. Those are compatible words.
Right. And then I guess you also have to have a basic business knowledge or sense that you can't take everything you make and spend it. You got to put a portion of it back into the business.
Yes.
To make it grow.
Yes. You cannot rob your business.
Right.
Because, you know, many people, yes, you have to put back into the product. You cannot, you know, drain the product. And you have to, you know, there's just so many things to know about in starting a business and how to survive in it and weather the difficult times. Because you can't assume that, okay, this month we had a record month and we can do this, we can afford this expenditure, da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, because you don't know what the next month is going to be, and what, you know, and what I have found, well, in life generally, you don't know what variables are going to take place day to day in business.
Which is why it's always wise to save 10% of your income.
Boom. Okay. Well, you know, we're almost out of time, and there's so many things I want to say, and I definitely want you to come back on a future show, and that we're planning. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. You know, we're going to do a follow-up show to this here. And for people who are in business that are partners in business, they co-own the business, and how they can protect each other's share in the business. Like if one passed or is deceased or something, how the other one can buy out the other one. And so stay tuned. There's more to come on that. But before I let my guests go, I want to thank you publicly. You know, many of you may not know that for 4 years, I served as public liaison to the mayor. And it was an opportunity that you gave me, and I'm really so grateful for that opportunity, because I consider it one of the top big things in my life, because I had the opportunity to go and to, well, as you said, over 500 meetings to hear what the concerns of the citizens, what their concerns were, what they wanted, and just to be an ear. And it gave me great insight into the needs of the community. And you know, it really made it.
You solved a lot of problems.
I tried.
No, you did. You solved a lot of problems before they became real problems, because you were the eyes and ears in the community, and you were able to deal directly with the staff that could solve those problems.
Yes,
it was great.
I remember, you know, one particular incident with the situation with that rumbling we heard about, something going down in Riverside, and how I reported back to you, and we were able to come up with a happy solution for that. But I want to thank you again, and we can't let you get away without a box of Esther Price fine chocolates. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
There's more to come on the William Pace Show. Stay with us.
Great Street, I just want to say, they do things that they don't do on Broadway. Say, you'll have the time of your life. I saw a man, he danced with his wife in Chicago, my hometown.